Hey everybody. So let's return part 4. We cut part 3 a little short there because we had to take that break for office hours. So now we're back, and I do want to reiterate as we move through power a little more here that power is a dynamic, and dynamic, part of the root word is dyad, and that means two people. So it takes two to tango, and it takes two to define the power relationship. So it is kind of an interchange, and a lot of times we have more power than we actually know, because we're not acknowledging it. Power is a shared process between two people, or two levels, if you will, in terms of a hierarchy. So let us talk a little bit about power plays. And a power play is your ability to influence another by exerting power on them. And a couple cautions about power plays. I mean, sometimes it's necessary to engage in power plays. Notice that, by admission, it's kind of manipulative, and I don't know if we want to work that way or run that route with any particular person, but consider if what you want is reasonable, right? Maybe I'm just having an emotional reaction that makes me want to lash out or strike at someone, and kind of flex my power muscle, but maybe it's not reasonable and maybe it's not useful. So is there an end game, I think is a big part of it. Never attack first, preemptively, right? Try not to put the other person on the defensive. If we've got to discuss an issue, let's find a way to communicate it in that it diminishes the potential for people reacting defensively. We'll talk more about that in communication later in the course. Consider their needs. I mean, approach it that you're on their side and you want to consider their needs. Demonstrate empathy in that regard. Try to acknowledge their point of view, that you see where they're coming from. And a lot of times that goes a long way. God, I see where you're coming from. I'm not sure that, and you don't have to agree. I'm not sure that I agree, but I certainly see where you're coming from, right? So, 5 types of power. What do we got? Well, coercive power, we talked about that. Reward power, we talked about that. Expert power, we talked about that. Let's add 2 more to the equation. Number 4, legitimate power. And this is through formal rank and or position. So many of you, have kind of, Annika, get down. Suffered the consequence of maybe a teacher power tripping on you, right? Annika. She's just full of it right now. So let us have Annika sit with us for a little bit, right? Are you going to stop being bad? All right. So legitimate power, formal rank or position. Who has the power in this dynamic? Ouch. Why are you biting me? Okay. Notice that power is shared. I mean, that's across species as well. So, but maybe you've had a teacher that kind of power trips on you, right? And why are they doing that? Well, they have the authority and they have the legitimate place to do that. But often notice that teachers that kind of power trip on students and students that perceive it as power tripping, those teachers don't have necessarily a very good rapport with their students. So if you want to flex your power muscle, you might be giving up something else, and consider that. And then referent power we discussed as well. So we've kind of looked at those. Let's talk about social impact theory. This is the likelihood that a person will respond to social influence. It increases with strength. How important influencing people are to you. The greater their import to you, then the greater the level of power that they exert over you. Immediacy, how close the group and you are in space and time, and immediacy increases power. Notice lack of immediacy really can destroy coercive power. Number 1, how many people are in the group, and in terms of peer pressure, the number of people can make a difference. So, social influence, referent social power, comes from confidence. It comes from charisma. 2, consider what the other person wants. And one way to kind of exert your referent power then is to the extent that people feel safe with you, right? And you won't hurt them emotionally. They feel comfortable with you, and that increases their liking towards you. It increases your referent power. If you betray someone, if you talk smack behind someone's back, you may never recover from that in terms of power with that person. Right? So loyalty has something to do with this. Now, people often want to feel understood, right, or feel important. And for those of you who took on the Dale Carnegie book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? Which is about power. One of the greatest ways to influence people and to be liked through referent power is ask them about themselves. So people who exert this kind of power often spend a lot of time asking questions about the person, right? To gain their trust, to figure out what qualities they need reinforced, right? And to demonstrate that you speak their language. So those are all kind of skills to that. Right? You get what you give in this regard. So to the extent that you're willing to invest in these people, then they may in fact be willing to invest in you and allow you greater levels of power. So other aspects of power plays, man, make sure that the threat you make will matter to the other person to be effective. You know, if you threaten them with something that they don't give a shit about, I mean, there is no power there, and it kind of can backfire because it makes you look like you don't know what's going on. Well, they're trying to tell me that they're going to do this to me, and I don't even really care. So, I mean, it just diminishes future power as well. Never issue an ultimatum unless you intend to go through with it. And this is certainly one of the key factors between abusive relationships. To say, you know, if you do that one more time, I'm going to leave you. And then you don't leave, or you allow them to talk you out of it, right? You're just sacrificing your power, and you're sacrificing your future credibility. That is, that your ultimatums will eventually actually be realized, which in this case probably appears that they won't. Never throw your weight around unless you really have the power to do it. So if you say, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to get you fired, etc. If you don't have the power to do that, people are just, you know, may laugh in your face or may just nod and laugh behind your back, right? Make sure you have your ducks in a row. And make sure that you're lined up. If you're going to threaten, you know, then you better have the wherewithal to get it done, right? Do we need to really exert this kind of power anyway? I mean, think about it. Your goal should be to reach a mutually agreeable solution, not to beat the other person. And if it really has just become a competition, is it really, am I just exerting my power so I can demonstrate that I won? Then maybe you want to step back and rethink that, right? One thing that really often helps move things along is to create a face-saving avenue as part of the process so that the person isn't beaten down. They don't have to walk away like a beaten dog with their tail between their legs. Find a way that they can stand upright, mutually agree to the solution, and have their pride intact as they leave the power dynamic. All right. This isn't about hurting other people, at least not in my POV. This is about getting it done, right? And sometimes we have to use power to get things done. But if getting it done means I just want to make this other person suffer, then maybe we need to look inside and say, what is it about me that wants this other person to suffer? Go where you want to with that, right? Now, maybe we've lost sight a little bit about Carolyn, my mentor in teaching this course, etc. And one of my there's two really favorite points, maybe three favorite points that we talked about. And I mean, I love my conversations with Carolyn. And this one is one that she brought up to me, and that is the principle of least interest. And it's kind of an irony, maybe not ultimately obvious. It wasn't to me. But in any relationship, the person who has the least interest in continuing the relationship essentially has the greatest power. That is the person with the most doable walk-away strategy. You know, if I just stand up and say, look, you know, I'm just not interested in living like this anymore. I'm out of here. And if I have the wherewithal to be out of here, that is, I have the security, I have the independence, I'm set up to do it, I really have the power. So, strangely enough, the person who's least interested in continuing the relationship probably has the greatest power in that relationship. A little bit of irony there. And thank you, Carolyn. Let's talk a little bit about social influence. And usually, from a social psychological point of view, there are two seminal, just kind of earth-shattering experiments that took place that demonstrated two very different types of social influence. And one is normative influence that comes to us from Solomon Asch, and the other is informational influence that comes to us from Muzaffar Sharif. You might not know Sharif for this line of work. If you're familiar with Sharif at all, you might remember the Roberts Cave experiment, where Sharif and Sharif then manipulated the dynamic between two groups of boys at a summer camp, right? And watched those kids go at each other's throat, and then they manipulated the situation to bring them back together again. But this other is Sharif's actually dissertation research out of the 1930s. The Ash experiment, pretty involved, but one of the most powerful situations probably ever created in the laboratory. So normative influence, as Ash is going to describe, is essentially what's happening is I'm going to go along with the group so that I get along with the group. I don't want to dissent. I may do something that I know is incorrect, but I'm going to do it anyway because I want to stay tight with the group, right? The deal is, though, when I'm left to my own devices, when I'm alone, I'm probably going to go back to my original opinion or judgment. I adopt the group opinion only so long as it serves my purpose. When the group's gone, my opinion goes back to what it was. Notice no real lasting persuasion or learning, either one, has taken place under this situation. Now, informational influence that Sharif is describing is I'm in a situation where I'm not sure what's correct. So I look to others, which is a natural human thing to do, is social referencing. What do other people do? What do other people think? Right? When alone, though, I tend to maintain this new learned attitude or this new learned behavior. So let's talk about normative influence first, and this is when we're worried about adhering to group norms so that we don't appear to be an outlier, right? We might disagree with the group opinion, but we'll go along with it. And in these cases, as I said, the new opinion that's been adopted is only going to last as long as I'm with the group. We call this then public conformity because I'm conforming in public, but when I return to the privacy of my own mind, I will go back to my own idea. So, how about this? And this is a masterful experiment. Social psychology is ripe with some of these just amazing studies that were conducted. So in case you're not familiar with the study, I'll give you a brief rundown, if you believe that it will be brief. Solomon Asch designs this study, simple study. What's going to happen is a group of people is shown a standard line, and this is going to be done 24 times, and it comes in pairs of cards, so there's 24 different pairs of cards, 24 trials. So trial 1, I show the standard line, this is line A, right, and I say, okay, participant number 1, which comparison line most resembles the standard line? And most people will look at that and they'll say, well, line 2. Now, here's the setup. You arrive as a participant, you believe you're on time, but everyone else is already there. They're already there because they're Confederates. Everyone else works for the experimenter. So Asch ran this with up to 11 Confederates sitting at a table with the participant showing up then as the 12th participant. At least that's what the participant believes. And they say, well, good, you're here. We can finally get started. Go ahead and sit in that 12th chair. So they show the standard line, and person number 1, you're trying to figure out what's going on. Person number 1 says, oh, number 2, person number 2 goes number 2, person number 3 goes number 2. So all the way, person 1 through 11, all Confederates have said the correct answer, the correct match is line 2. You're the 12th person, you look at it and you say, well, okay, line 2, because, you know, it's like obvious. I don't even know why we're doing this. This is a stupid experiment, but number 2. Now, every 4th trial, so trial 4, trial 8, trial 12, they mix it up and they give the wrong answer. So we changed the cards. We have a different set of cards here. What are we going to look at now? So now imagine this is trial number 4. Person number 1 says, line 1. And you go, eh? And then person 2 goes, line 1. And you go, Person number 3 goes, line 1. And so it goes. They go through the lines, and now 11 people have said the correct answer is line 1. What are you going to do? It's obvious it ain't line 1. You know it's line 2. But 11 people have just said it's line 1. And this is the power of the situation. This is an amazing experiment, right? This is some heavy-duty coercive pressure. What's on the line? You're going to look like a fool if you answer incorrectly, if you buck the group. So, 75% of the people in the experiment at some point or another went along with the group and gave the incorrect answer. 25% never went along with the group, right? So, powerful situation. How does it work? Well, the group characteristics. Now, what Ash does is he ran this study the first time. That's his baseline study. Then he ran like 17 different variations. I remember because of my graduate social psychology class, we had to read the original study, and it was a long study. Ash was tremendous with debriefing the participants to understand what they were going through. And he manipulated the study, so he kept manipulating different components of the study, and it allowed him to understand all the factors, or at least a huge number of factors that produce this type of conformity. So, what's going to happen? Well, the size of the majority matters. So, Ash got it done with 11 people, but he got it all the way down to 4 and found it was just as effective with 4 as it was with 11. So the size of the majority matters, right? Now, the presence of a dissenter from the majority allowed the participant to, in fact, give the correct answer, even though it was in disagreement with everybody else. Now, how does that work? Let us imagine that 1 is the correct answer, but this is one of those 4th trials, right? So, in this particular variation of the experiment, we're looking, let's say we have 8 people. Person 1 gives an incorrect answer. They say line 1. Person 2 says line 1. Person 3 says line 1. Person 4 gives a correct answer, but incorrect answer, but a different incorrect answer. They say it's line 3. So now, you're the 8th person. 6 people have said line 1. 1 person has said line 3. And what do you say? Lo and behold, strangely enough, the participant under those situations gives the correct answer. This is line 2. A single dissenter opens the door for dissent to be okay. And this is hugely important, especially if you work in groups or teams in decision-making processes, let's say at work. A single dissenter opens the door to discussion. We often call this person the devil's advocate. This is what if we're wrong, right? And goes through this process of dissent. Now, people may conform for different reasons, and this is the result of Ash's debriefing that he uncovered this. Some people question their own perceptions. They legitimately say, I don't know, man, I must not have understood the experiment, or I was in a position where I couldn't see the lines properly, so I just went along because I think I was messing it up. They knew what they were doing, I didn't know what I was doing, so I went along with them. Okay? But some people conformed. They said, I know it was a wrong answer, but I gave the wrong answer just because I didn't want to rock the boat. So there may be 2 different reasons that people conform, right? Now, at the same time, personality can play a role, and what do we know? Well, we know that 25% of the people who participated in this experiment never went along. They never gave a wrong answer. So, great study for social psychologists, because 75% of the people fell prey to the pressure, the conformity pressure. But we have to then say, hey, personality psychologist, tell me something else. And the personality psychologist says, yeah, some people, though, will refuse to conform under those conditions. So notice, social psychology can explain the behavior of 75% of the people, but we have to look at personality psychology to explain the other 25% of the folks. Personality and social psychology belong together. They need to work together because they can deliver a pretty complete package of how the world works. So, what else we got? Individual factors then? Well, collectivist versus individualist cultures. You can imagine that collectivist cultures will succumb to the conformity pressure to a greater extent. They have a greater desire not to rock the boat. Okay? And that's kind of part of being in a collectivist culture. Right? It's not about you and your opinion. It's about what makes the group feel better about itself. And if I argue with the group, I might be bringing shame upon myself or bringing shame upon the group. So collectivists are more likely to go along. To the extent you desire to be liked, and this is a tough one, because the more I want to be liked, the more I'm willing to conform to that group and their norms and behaviors. Right? Folks with low self-esteem may be more inclined to go along. Those people who demonstrate social shyness may be more inclined to go along because, let's face it, if you're going to be the one dissenter, you're standing up there alone. That's not a position most shy people will want to adopt. Okay? Now, obviously, there's exceptions to each one of these, and that's what's the beauty of psychology, because it lives in a world of exceptions. Right? Maybe lack of familiarity with the task, so I just went along because I didn't understand. I was late. Maybe they gave instructions before I got here. Right? And the need for social support, fear of loss of social support. So if these are people who typically have my back, I better go along with them in this instance, even though I know it's not correct, because it'll have payoffs in terms of the maintenance of social support in the future. Okay. So what do we have? One more point to make. Ash brought these people back 6 months later as participants and asked them to do the experiment again. All 24 trials with the identical set of cards, and guess what? Everyone who came back and did it by themselves scored 24 out of 24. There were no errors. The conformity doesn't last when the group is gone, was the big point. Now, let's contrast that with informational influence. And this is a great contrast. If you take my social psychology class, I warn you, as an essay question, I usually make students compare these two studies, right? That's how they belong together. Now, this autokinetic effect that Muzafer Sharif was using as the paradigm in his experiment, the methodology, has nothing to do with social psychology. It's a simple idea that if we stare at a point of light off in the distance with no reference area behind it, a single point of light in the darkness, if we stare at it 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, it appears to move even though it's stationary. It's just the eye trying to readjust and trying to run its feature detectors. It's just a perceptual process. So Muzafer Sharif hears about this. It's not what he wants to study, but he says, wow, I could use that in my laboratory. And that's what he does. He sets up a laboratory that's kind of like a long hallway, and at the very end of this hallway is a single little point of light, just this little light, right? And a completely darkened room. So the lights go off, the little point of light goes on, and he asks the participant, hey, did it move? And the participant goes yes, because of the autokinetic effect. And then he says, I want you to estimate how far it moved. Well, it's pitch dark. There's no point of reference. So it's impossible to estimate with any accuracy the amount of movement. Notice, this is where we don't have the lines. Hey, this line matches that line. End of story. Point of light moving? I don't know. And nobody knows. So what we're looking at now is what's called informational influence. I don't have enough good information to make that judgment, so I look to others to help me make a more accurate judgment. So participants were alone first. That gave baseline estimates for each participant, right? And then they do what they're called, they're yoked together. So now participants who are solo are brought in to work in a group of 3. So we can see, this is just one sample, what we see is these are 3 participants, and this is the estimates of the movement in inches that they gave on their first trial while they were alone. One person said, oh, it moved about an inch, 3/4 of an inch. Another person said it moved 2 inches. Another person said it moved a whopping like 7.5 inches. So we have some variability in these estimates. There's no point of reference, so that makes sense. Now, when they're all brought together, but they do it now, one person says, hey, how far it moved, another person says how far it moved, right? What we see is their estimates of its movement begin to converge. And by the 3rd trial, we got everyone pretty much saying the same thing. People have conformed, but they're conformed on the basis of using each other's opinion as information to an unsolvable problem, kind of an unknowable. Very different. So, 2 types of conformity then. Informational influence, what do we know? It yields private conformity and lasting change. So when Muzafer Sharif brought people back to do the same study by themselves alone 6 months later, just like Ash had done, they conformed to their final estimates that they learned in the groups of 3. Normative influence, on the other hand, we conform in public, but when we're on our own, we go back to our own opinion. That is, it provides temporary change. So majority versus influence, what do we learn? The power of numbers, we learned from Ash, 3 to 4 was about right. We also learned a single deviant opens the door to dissent. We've learned the difference between private and public conformity. Majorities have to use pressure, normative influence. But minorities, when they're a group, have to use persuasion. And if you've ever seen the movie 12 Angry Men, it's a great example of a single juror dissenting at the beginning of the jury deliberations, and over time using information to sway the judgment of every juror. If you haven't seen 12 Angry Men, it's a classic movie. It's worth seeing. So, let's stop now and go to our next